Sometimes freedom blossoms from the cruelest betrayal. In the untamed plains of the Colorado Territory, where the wind whispers secrets and carries tears, a young woman was about to discover that abandonment by her own kin could be the first step toward her true family. Genevieve Caldwell, 22, pregnant and trembling, watched her father ride away under a sky heavy with broken promises. A leaden silence hung over the Caldwell house. In the parlor, with its drawn curtains, Genevieve stood by the window, her trembling hands resting on her belly, still concealed beneath the folds of her dark dress. Outside, the Colorado wind whistled through the boards of the house front, carrying away the last leaves of October. Theron Caldwell, seated in his leather armchair, hadn't looked up from his newspaper since she'd entered the room. His graying hair was perfectly slicked back, his beard trimmed to perfection, his suit impeccable despite the early hour. Everything about him reeked of control, that obsession with appearance that had governed their home since her mother's death. "Father?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind groaning at the window panes. He slowly turned a page of his newspaper, deliberately ignoring her call. The ticking of the grandfather clock resonated in the room like the frantic beats of a distressed heart. Genevieve tightened her fingers around the small silver crucifix her mother had left her, the last link to a time when love still existed in that house. "I need to speak to you," she insisted, her voice gaining firmness despite the fear knotting her stomach. This time, Theron lowered his newspaper and looked at her with eyes as cold as steel. His face betrayed no emotion, but Genevieve knew her father well enough to see the tension in the line of his jaw, the way his fingers clenched on the paper. "Do you have something to confess, Genevieve?" His voice was low, dangerously calm. She closed her eyes, searching for the courage she had rehearsed 100 times before her mirror. When she opened them again, she saw that her father had risen and now stood before her, imposing in his dark suit, his hands clasped behind his back. "I'm pregnant," she breathed. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to have ceased blowing. Theron remained motionless, his marble face betraying no reaction. Then, slowly, his lips pressed into a thin, cruel line. "Who?" That single word cracked in the air like a whip. Genevieve instinctively recoiled, her shoulders touching the cold window. "I won't tell you," she replied, her voice trembling but determined. Theron's face hardened further, his eyes narrowing to 2 icy slits. He took a step towards her, so close she could smell his cologne mixed with cold tobacco. "You won't tell me?" His voice rose a notch, vibrating with contained anger. "You dare defy me after defiling this family's name?" Genevieve clutched the crucifix so tightly that the metal dug into her palm. She thought of her mother, of her last whispered words in that same parlor. "Be brave, my heart. Don't let anyone extinguish your light." "I'm protecting someone," she murmured, tears welling in the corners of her eyes. Theron slapped her. The crack echoed in the room, followed by Genevieve's stunned silence. Her cheek burned, but it was her heart that bled most. Never, even in his worst rages, had her father struck her. "You're protecting a coward," he spat, turning his back and returning to his armchair. "A man who took you and doesn't even have the courage to face his actions." He sat down heavily, running his hands through his perfectly coiffed hair, disarraying it for the first time Genevieve could recall. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters against the wooden walls. 22 years, he muttered, more to himself than to her. 22 years I've devoted to making you a respectable lady. 22 years building a reputation in this town, and you destroy everything in one night of debauchery. Genevieve wiped away the tear that ran down her bruised cheek. "It wasn't debauchery, Father. It was—" "Silence!" he roared, springing to his feet. "I don't want to hear your romantic justifications. You have disgraced this family. You have dishonored your mother's memory." These last words struck her like a dagger to the heart. She reeled, leaning against the window frame to keep from falling. "Mother would have understood," she whispered. Theron's face twisted with rage. "Your mother was a saint. She would never have tolerated such conduct." He paced before the cold fireplace, his boots echoing on the polished floor. "But it matters little now, the damage is done." He stopped abruptly and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Something cold, calculating, that chilled her blood. "We leave tomorrow," he announced in a neutral tone that contrasted with his previous fury. Leave? Where to? To visit an old friend. In the Western Territories. He adjusted his tie, regaining his usual composure. The prairie air will do you good. Allow you to reflect on your mistakes. Genevieve frowned. Her father had never mentioned a friend out west, and the idea of a journey seemed to come out of nowhere. And the child? Theron froze, his back still turned to her. When he finally replied, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it over the wind that now howled at the windows. The child will no longer be our problem after this journey. The dawn was barely breaking when Theron knocked on her bedroom door. Genevieve hadn't slept a wink all night, rehashing her father's enigmatic words. The child will no longer be our problem. These words echoed in her head like a death knell. Get dressed. We leave in an hour, he announced in a neutral voice through the wooden door. She rose laboriously, her legs still trembling from the emotional exhaustion of the day before. In her tarnished mirror, she saw the reflection of a woman she no longer recognized. Purplish circles under her green eyes, a cheek still pink from the slap, auburn hair in disarray. Her fingers grazed her mother's crucifix, seeking a comfort that no longer came. Outside, the wind had calmed, giving way to an unsettling silence. Even the birds seemed to have deserted Durango that morning. When she came downstairs, Theron was waiting by the wagon, already loaded with provisions. He wore his travel coat, the one he reserved for important occasions, and his polished boots gleamed in the golden morning light. Beside him stood their old horse, Tom, who neighed softly as he saw her approach. Get in, he ordered without looking at her. The journey began in a heavy silence. Genevieve watched the familiar landscape of Durango fade behind them. The wooden houses with flowered verandas, the church with its white steeple, the general store where she used to buy her ribbons. Everything that had made up her world receded with the rhythm of Tom's hooves on the dusty road. They took the road west, the one that led into the wild territories. The further they went, the sparser the vegetation became, giving way to expanses of yellowed grass and red rocks. The sun climbed in the sky, warming the air that smelled of sage and dust. Father, she ventured after several hours of silence. This old friend, what's his name? Theron did not answer immediately. His hands holding the reins were clenched, knuckles white from the effort. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely distant. You'll meet him soon enough. A shiver ran down Genevieve's spine despite the growing heat. Something in her father's tone, in the way he avoided her gaze, told her that this journey was not what he claimed it to be. They stopped at noon near a watering hole to let Tom drink and to eat. Theron took bread and cheese from his saddlebags, placing them between them on a blanket without a word. Genevieve wasn't hungry, but she forced down a few bites, knowing she had to preserve her strength for the child. You know, Theron said suddenly, staring at the horizon. Your mother was expecting you when we settled in Durango. She glowed with happiness. He paused, slowly chewing his bread. She spoke endlessly of the future, of the family we would build. Genevieve looked up at him, surprised by this rare mention of her mother. Did you truly love her? For the first time in years, Theron's expression softened imperceptibly. More than my own life. Then his face snapped shut like a trap. That's why I cannot bear to see what she held most precious defiled by your recklessness. Tears welled in Genevieve's eyes, but she held them back. She touched her crucifix again, feeling the warm metal against her skin. They resumed their journey without another word. The landscape grew wilder, the hills transforming into rocky mesas, civilization fading behind them like a mirage. And with every mile covered, Genevieve felt a terrifying certainty growing within her that she would never see Durango again. The sun was setting as they reached the plains. The golden grass undulated under a warm wind that carried unfamiliar scents. Red earth, wild sage, and something more primitive that Genevieve couldn't identify. Tom slowed his pace, his ears pricked towards the horizon. Theron pulled on the reins, scanning the surroundings with unusual attention. In the distance, silhouettes stood out against the reddish sky. Father, Genevieve whispered, a dull fear tightening her throat. Stay calm, he replied, but his voice betrayed a nervousness she didn't know he possessed. The silhouettes drew closer. Horsemen. About 10 men with long hair, painted faces mounted on pinto horses. Comanches. Genevieve had heard terrifying tales in Durango's parlors, but never had she imagined meeting them. They encircled the wagon with fluid grace, their horses dancing nervously. One of them, older than the others, rode forward. His dark eyes moved from Theron to Genevieve with wary curiosity. He spoke in his language, then repeated in broken English, "Why, white man, come sacred land?" Theron slowly dismounted from the wagon, his hands clearly visible. Genevieve noticed they trembled imperceptibly. "I seek Chief Kahetu," he declared in a voice he intended to be assured. "I have something for him." The painted-faced man tilted his head, intrigued. He exchanged a few quick words with his companions, then turned his attention back to Theron. "Chief Kahetu Far. Me, Ayana, speak for him. What white man bring?" Theron glanced at Genevieve, and in his eyes she saw something that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't fear. It was cold determination. "This woman," he said, pointing at his daughter. "She deceived me. She stole from me. She ran away. Do with her what you will." The world stopped around Genevieve. Her father's words echoed in her head like thunderclaps. She stood up in the wagon, swaying. "No!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Father, no! I beg you!" But Theron was already remounting Tom, whom he had unhitched from the wagon. He carefully avoided her gaze, his face hard as stone. "Father!" she screamed again, reaching out to him in a desperate gesture. For the first time since they had left Durango, Theron truly looked at her. For a moment, an emotion flickered across his face. Regret, pain, lost love. Then he set his lips and spurred Tom. "Farewell, Genevieve," he simply said. He rode away at a gallop, raising a cloud of red dust. Genevieve followed him with her eyes until he was nothing more than a black speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. Silence fell back upon the plain. Only the wind continued to blow, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. Genevieve brought her hand to her crucifix, her fingers trembling on the cold metal. Around her, the Comanche warriors watched her with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Ayana made a gesture, and two of them approached to help her descend from the wagon. She was alone, completely, irremediably alone. Ayana's hands were surprisingly soft as he helped her descend from the wagon. Genevieve collapsed to her knees in the red dust, her sobs shaking her entire body. The warm wind dried her tears before they reached the ground. The warriors spoke among themselves in their language, their voices low and concerned. Genevieve understood nothing, but she sensed their distrust, their confusion. Who was this white woman abandoned by her own kin? Ayana knelt before her, studying her tear-ravaged face. He said something to his companions, then extended a hand to her. "Get up, white woman, you come with us." Trembling, Genevieve straightened up. Her legs almost gave out, but she held firm. She clutched her crucifix so tightly that her knuckles whitened. The journey to the camp was a waking nightmare. Sitting side-saddle on a horse she couldn't control, surrounded by silent warriors, Genevieve watched an increasingly hostile landscape pass by. Rocky mesas rose like sentinels, and the grass gave way to thorny bushes. When they reached the village, dozens of eyes turned towards her. Women, children, elders, all observed the stranger with curiosity and suspicion. The teepees formed a perfect circle around a central fire that crackled in the declining light. A young woman with beaded braids came forward, her black eyes flashing. She spoke quickly to Ayana, her voice rising sharply. Genevieve didn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly accusatory. "Sakima say you bring bad luck," Ayana translated. "Woman who betray her own blood. Earth reject." An old man emerged from the shadow of a teepee, leaning on a carved staff. His white hair gleamed in the firelight, and his weathered face bore the wisdom of many winters. He raised his hand, and the voices instantly fell silent. "Matahano want to look," Ayana murmured. The old man approached Genevieve, his piercing eyes probing her soul. He circled her slowly, as if he could read her history in the air around her. Then he stopped before her and extended a wrinkled hand towards her face. Genevieve did not move when his fingers grazed her cheek, still marked by her father's slap. Matahano nodded, understanding. He spoke at length in his language, his deep voice echoing in the silence of the camp. When he finished, a murmur ran through the assembly. "Matahano say father hit pregnant daughter. Father no longer father, Ayana explained. You stay. We watch. We see if spirit good or bad. Another man appeared, younger with feathers in his hair and blue paint on his cheeks. His gaze met Genevieve's, and she read a gravity in it that made her shiver. Kahitu, our chief, Ayana whispered. He decide your fate. The wind rose, making the central fire's flames dance. In that flickering light, surrounded by strangers in a world she did not know, Genevieve closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. Her new life had just begun. She was settled in an isolated teepee on the outskirts of the camp. The tanned hide tent smelled of smoke and dried herbs, foreign scents that cruelly reminded her of her solitude. Genevieve sat on the furs arranged on the ground, clutching her knees to her chest. The first days were a silent hell. She spoke to no one, only leaving for her essential needs. The women of the village brought her food, bison stew, corn cakes, bitter teas, which she accepted with a grateful nod. Sakima often passed by her teepee, casting accusatory glances. She mumbled in her language, words Genevieve guessed were hostile. The young Comanche blamed her for any misfortunes that might befall the tribe. Matahano, meanwhile, came to sit near the entrance every evening. He did not speak, content to smoke his pipe while looking at the stars. His silent presence was the only thing that soothed Genevieve's anguish. On the 5th day, she could no longer remain idle. She left her teepee and observed the camp's activities. The women washed clothes in a nearby stream, their crystalline laughter carried by the warm wind. Genevieve approached timidly, her steps hesitant on the dry grass. A gray-haired woman looked up at her, surprised. They looked at each other for a moment. Then the Comanche offered her a stained cloth. Clean, she said in broken English. Genevieve's hands trembled as she took the garment. She knelt by the cold water and began to rub the fabric against the smooth stones. The repetitive motion calmed her, made her feel useful. The other women watched her out of the corner of their eyes, whispering among themselves. But none drove her away. Matahano appeared near the stream, an enigmatic smile on his lips. He squatted beside her and dipped his hands in the clear water. Water heal, he said slowly, searching for his words in English. Wash away heart's sorrow. Genevieve looked up at him, surprised he spoke her language. You understand English? Little. Learn with traders. He pointed to his heart. But understand here. Pain same everywhere. For the first time since her abandonment, Genevieve felt her tears flow freely. They fell into the stream water, mingling with the current that carried them away toward the horizon. My father, she began, but her voice broke. Father who abandoned daughter, not father, Matahano declared with quiet conviction. You now daughter of the earth. Earth never abandon. He stood and plucked a sage branch, which he offered to her. For baby. Herb protect. Genevieve took the fragrant branch, instinctively touching her belly, which was beginning to round. For the first time in days, she thought of the child, not as a burden, but as a hope. The wind blew gently, stirring her auburn hair. Around her, the women continued their washing, and their voices seemed less foreign than before. Weeks passed like clouds in the immense Colorado sky. Genevieve slowly learned the rhythms of the tribe, observing the women tanning hides, preparing remedies, weaving willow baskets. Matahano taught her the names of plants in Comanche, their healing properties, how to harvest them according to the moon phases. Here, medicine for sick belly, he would say, showing her a gnarled root. There, herb to sleep without bad dreams. His rough hands guided Genevieve's, teaching her to grind leaves, to measure infusions. For the first time in her life, someone taught her without demanding perfection, accepting her mistakes with patience. Kahitu often passed by her teepee, stopping to exchange a few words with Matahano. He observed Genevieve discreetly, his dark eyes unreadable. She felt his gaze on her when she worked, but he kept his distance, respectful of her pregnant condition and her precarious status in the tribe. One morning, cries of alarm rent the calm air of the camp. Genevieve emerged from her teepee to see the warriors pointing towards the horizon. Dark clouds gathered in the west, menacing and heavy with rain. Storm come, Matahano announced, hurrying towards her. Big water. Dangerous. The storm broke with incredible violence. The wind howled between the teepees, flattening the grass and stirring up dust devils. Then the rain came, at first in large, spaced drops, then in torrents that quickly turned the ground into slick mud. Genevieve had taken refuge in her teepee when she heard a sinister crack followed by a cry of distress. She ran out into the pouring rain and saw that Sakima's teepee had collapsed, crushed by a torn branch. The young woman was trapped under the wooden poles and soaked canvas. Without thinking, Genevieve ran towards her, wading through the red mud that rose to her ankles. Other women tried to free Sakima, but the poles were heavy and slippery. "Careful!" Genevieve cried in English, then repeated the word in Comanche she had learned. "Hansi!" Together, they lifted the debris. Sakima was conscious but injured, blood flowing from a cut on her forehead. Genevieve helped her up, putting the young Comanche woman's arm around her shoulders. If this story captivates you and you want to discover how Genevieve will transform her relationship with Sakima and find her place in this new family, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any episodes of this moving saga that transports us to the wild America of 1878. They took refuge in Genevieve's teepee, where she gently cleaned the wound with the herbs Matahano had taught her. Sakima watched her, surprised by the gentleness of her movements. "Why you help?" she asked in her hesitant English. Genevieve looked up from her work, instinctively touching her crucifix. "Because you would have done the same for me." Sakima frowned, unconvinced. But when Genevieve finished bandaging her wound, she briefly placed her hand on the white woman's. "Maybe I'm wrong about you," she murmured. The days following the storm revealed the extent of the damage. The water had swept away the sacred stone circle where the elders communed with the spirits. Genevieve observed the somber faces around the central fire, sensing their conviction that her presence had brought imbalance. "They say the spirits are angry," Sakima explained to her. "That the white woman has broken the harmony." Genevieve caressed her rounding belly. "Perhaps they are right." "No," Sakima said firmly. "You saved me. Bad spirits not save life." That night, groans awoke the camp. Ayana's little daughter burned with fever. Other children were affected, burning foreheads, wheezing breath. When Kahetu's son fell ill, panic spread through the tribe. Genevieve presented herself before Matahano. "Let me help." The old man hesitated, then nodded. "Show what you know." She had learned healing from her mother. Simple gestures that the ladies of Durango practiced during epidemics. She asked for fresh water, clean cloths, and began to sponge the small feverish bodies. For 3 days, Genevieve did not leave the sick teepees. She alternated cold and warm compresses, prepared broths, cradled the children. Her crucifix swayed gently, reflecting the light of the fires. Kahetu watched her care for his son with gratitude. When the child finally opened his eyes, smiling, the chief placed his hand on Genevieve's shoulder. "Thank you," he said in his language. One by one, the fevers broke. The children regained their laughter. Around Genevieve, the gazes changed, no longer suspicion, but respectful curiosity. Sakima came to find her on the evening the last child recovered. "I ask forgiveness," she said, placing a woven blanket over her shoulders. "You not bring misfortune, you bring healing." That night, Genevieve fell asleep without crying. The wind blew softly and she thought she heard her mother's voice. "You are where you are meant to be, my heart." The weeks that followed were the most peaceful Genevieve had known since her arrival. She accompanied Sakima in her daily tasks, learning to weave baskets, to prepare pemmican for the approaching winter. Her hands, once soft as a lady of societies, hardened with manual labor. Kahetu often came to sit by the fire where she worked. He didn't speak much English, but they communicated through gestures, through smiles. He showed her how to recognize animal tracks in the dust, taught her the names of the stars in Comanche. One evening, as she was sewing beads onto a garment, he approached with something in his hands. "For you," he said awkwardly in English. It was a necklace of small blue stones, carved with meticulous care. Genevieve looked up at him, surprised by this gesture of thoughtfulness. "It's beautiful," she murmured, instinctively touching her crucifix. Kahetu noticed her gesture and frowned. "Your God, he angry with you?" Genevieve pondered this question, so simple yet so complex. "I don't know. My father said I had sinned, but my mother, she would have loved me no matter what. Father who abandoned daughter, not father," Kahetu repeated. echoing Matahano's words. Me, I see brave woman. Woman who heal children. Good spirit. Their gazes met in the dancing firelight. For the first time in months, Genevieve felt seen, truly seen, not as a fallen woman or an intruder, but as a woman worthy of esteem. Thank you, she whispered. Kahetu reached out to her, hesitant. When she didn't recoil, he gently grazed her cheek with his fingertips. You stay? He asked. Forever? Before she could answer, shouts rang out from the edge of the camp. Horsemen approached in the night, their silhouettes etched against the stars. Kahetu sprang to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his tomahawk. The guard warriors rushed forward, forming a protective circle around the central fire. In the darkness, Genevieve distinguished 4 men on horseback, their pale faces gleaming in the moonlight. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the leading figure. Theron Caldwell had returned. He dismounted with the assurance of a man accustomed to command, flanked by 3 armed companions. His eyes swept the camp until they found Genevieve, huddled by the fire. My daughter, he said in a loud voice that carried in the tense silence. I've come to take you home. Genevieve slowly rose, her legs trembling beneath her. Her father was there, before her, as in her most terrifying nightmares. But something had changed within her. She was no longer the broken young woman he had abandoned. No, she said, her voice clear in the cool night. The wind rose, stirring the flames in Genevieve's hair as if to support her in her rebellion. Theron's face hardened at his daughter's defiance. The 3 men accompanying him, 2 scruffy bearded militiamen and a nervous merchant, laid their hands on their weapons. Genevieve, Theron said in a voice he intended to be paternal but which sounded false. You're not thinking clearly. These savages have bewitched you. Come, we're going back to Durango. The town will forgive your indiscretion. He held out a hand to her, his cold eyes fixed on her rounded belly. The child will be born in a proper home, with real doctors. Not in this barbarity. Genevieve recoiled, instinctively moving closer to Kahetu, who had placed himself at her side. Around them, the Comanche warriors formed a silent circle, their faces impassive but their bodies taut as bows. You abandoned me, she said, her voice trembling but firm. You delivered me like merchandise. I no longer belong to you. Theron narrowed his eyes, his patience fraying. You are my daughter. You will always bear my name. These people kidnapped you, held you against your will. That is why I have come with armed men. A murmur ran through the Comanche assembly. Matahano stepped forward, his cane tapping on the hardened earth. Man lie, he said in his laborious English. You give daughter. We see, we hear. The word of a savage against that of a civilized man? Theron scoffed. Who will believe such nonsense? Kahetu gently placed his hand on Genevieve's shoulder. She felt the warmth of his fingers through the fabric of her dress, that quiet strength that had supported her for weeks. You choose, he murmured. We protect if you want to stay. Genevieve looked at her father, this man who had governed her life with fear and control. Then she looked at Kahetu, Sakima, Matahano, all these faces that had welcomed her despite their initial distrust. She thought of the children she had nursed, the herbs Matahano had taught her, Sakima's laughter when they worked together. She thought of the peace she had found here, that feeling of finally belonging somewhere. No, she repeated louder, her hand clutching her crucifix. I am not coming back. You betrayed me, and I have chosen to live. Anger exploded on Theron's face. Very well, he spat. If you prefer a savage life, you shall have it. He made a sharp gesture towards his companions. Take her. Everything shifted in an instant. The militiamen drew their weapons, but the Comanche warriors were faster. Kahetu pushed Genevieve behind him, his tomahawk gleaming in the firelight. In the ensuing melee, Genevieve saw Kahetu lunging at one of the militiamen who was aiming at her. The man struck him down with a rifle butt to the skull. The Comanche chief collapsed, blood flowing from his temple. Kahetu, she cried, rushing to him despite the chaos. Genevieve knelt beside Kahetu, her trembling hands pressing a cloth against his bleeding wound. Around them, the battle raged. The Comanche warriors had gained the upper hand, pushing the intruders back towards the outskirts of the camp. Hold on, she murmured in Comanche, using the words Matahano had taught her. Kahitu opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on her anxious face. Even wounded, he tried to raise himself to protect her. "No, stay down," she insisted, aided by Sakima, who rushed over with medicinal herbs. The cries of battle were already fading. The militiamen, overwhelmed by the Comanches' numbers and determination, retreated with Theron. Genevieve heard her father's voice shout into the night. "You'll regret this, Genevieve. You'll see what it costs to live among savages." Then the sound of hooves faded into the prairie's darkness. But just as Genevieve thought the danger had passed, a searing pain pierced her. She brought her hands to her belly, feeling a violent cramp double her over. "No," she moaned. "Not now." Sakima understood immediately. "Baby, come," she cried in Comanche, alerting the women of the camp. A new wave of pain swept over Genevieve. The stress of the fight, the fear, the emotion, everything combined to precipitate the birth. Sakima and 2 other women helped her to her teepee, while Matahano bent over the wounded Kahitu. Inside the tent, lit by the flickering light of tallow candles, Genevieve struggled against the intensifying contractions. Sakima was by her side, holding her hand, murmuring words of encouragement in her native tongue. "Breathe with the wind," Sakima said. "Let pain go with it." Outside, the wind had risen, whistling between the teepees as if responding to the call. Genevieve closed her eyes, focusing on that natural breath that seemed to carry the strength of all the women who had given birth before her on this land. Hours passed in an alternation of pain and hope. At one point, Matahano entered the teepee, his grave face marked by fatigue. "Kahitu fine," he announced. "Wound not deep. He asked about you." Genevieve smiled through her tears. Tell him his child is coming." For in her heart, she now knew that this baby would not just be hers. It would also belong to this family she had chosen, to this land that had welcomed her. A stronger contraction made her cry out. Sakima squeezed her hand. "He's coming," she said with excitement. "Your son is coming into the world." And indeed, in the golden light of dawn filtering through the teepee walls, Genevieve gave birth to a little boy with dark hair and eyes shining like wet earth after rain. The moment the newborn's first cries echoed in the teepee, something extraordinary happened. The wind that had blown all night suddenly calmed, giving way to a deep and serene silence. Sakima looked up at the tent walls, surprised. "Wind stops," she murmured in wonder. Earth breathed quiet now. Genevieve held her son against her chest, feeling his tiny heart beat against hers. The child had the soft black hair of the Comanches, but his eyes were a deep green like his mother's. "Tawodi," Matahano said, entering the teepee, his wrinkled face illuminated by a smile. Perfect name for him. Means he who unites. Women of the tribe gathered at the entrance, bringing gifts, woven blankets, protective amulets, blessed herbs. Even those who had been most wary of Genevieve now approached with respect. Kahitu appeared, supported by 2 warriors, a white bandage around his head. His gaze fell upon Genevieve and the child, and his face lit up with profound joy. "My son," he said simply. And in those 2 words, Genevieve heard a promise, a commitment that transcended blood ties. He knelt with difficulty near her, extending a finger that little Tawodi instinctively grasped. "Strong," Kahitu murmured proudly. "He will be great warrior, or great healer like his mother." Outside, a piercing cry rent the morning air. All looked up at the sky where hawks circled above the camp, their wings spread in the golden light of dawn. "Signs," Matahano whispered, his eyes gleaming with emotion. "Spirits speak. Say balance returned. Child of 2 worlds, bring peace." The elders emerged from their teepees, observing the spectacle with veneration. Some sang prayers of gratitude, others burned sage as offerings. The atmosphere of the camp had completely changed. Where suspicion had reigned before, a new serenity settled. Sakima carefully took Tawodi in her arms, cradling him with maternal tenderness. "I be his aunt," she declared solemnly. "Protect always. Teach traditions." Genevieve touched her crucifix, then looked around at the loving faces surrounding her. For the first time since her mother's death, she truly felt like family. "Thank you," she said, her voice broken by emotion. "Thank you for accepting us." Matahano placed his wrinkled hand on her head, like a blessing. "You no longer a stranger now. You daughter of the Red Earth, Tawodi, son of two peoples. Together, you bring us hope." The sun climbed in the cloudless sky, bathing the camp in a soft, warm light. In the distance, the prairie stretched endlessly, peaceful and welcoming. Genevieve closed her eyes, listening to the murmurs of gratitude around her, feeling the warmth of this new family she had found after so much suffering. The months following Tawodi's birth completely transformed Genevieve's life. Having grown up in her father's oppressive shadow, she now discovered an existence of simplicity and authenticity. Every morning she awoke in the teepee she now shared with Kahetu, listening to Tawodi's babbling and the familiar sounds of the camp coming alive. The Comanche chief had become far more than a protector. He was her companion, her equal, the one who looked at her with respect and tenderness. "Look," he said one morning, showing Tawodi attempting his first steps between their arms. He walks towards two worlds. Like his mother, Genevieve smiled, watching her son waver between her and Kahetu. The child had inherited her determination and the quiet wisdom of the Comanches. His first words were a mix of English and Comanche, as if he instinctively understood his role as a bridge between cultures. Matahano had officially made her his apprentice, transmitting the secrets of medicinal plants, healing rituals, and ancestral prayers. She now bore a Comanche name, Ayana Tabe, Eternal Blossom, in reference to her ability to revive hope where suffering reigned. "You are our living memory now," the old man told her one day, watching her prepare a decoction. "You know both ways of healing, your people's and ours. It is a precious gift." Sakima had become her sister in heart, the one with whom she shared the joys and sorrows of daily life. They sewed together, prepared meals, laughed at Tawodi's clumsy first steps. Their friendship had been born of the storm and blossomed in newfound peace. One evening, as she cradled Tawodi by the central fire, Genevieve spotted a familiar silhouette on the horizon. A lone rider approached the camp, and her heart tightened when she recognized her father's straight posture. But this time, Theron dismounted without weapons, without companions. He advanced slowly, hands visible, in an attitude that was no longer threatening. The warriors let him pass but remained vigilant. He stopped a few feet from Genevieve, his gaze passing from her to the child she held in her arms. For the first time in years, she saw not anger in his eyes, but pain. "I learned," he began in a hoarse voice. "I learned you had a son." Genevieve slowly stood, Tawodi against her chest. "What are you doing here?" Theron lowered his eyes, his hands trembling slightly. I've come to ask your forgiveness, and to see my grandson." The wind rose softly, stirring the flames of the fire in Genevieve's hair. In that breeze, she felt her mother's presence, that woman who would have wanted love to triumph over resentment. She touched her crucifix, then looked at Tawodi, who was gurgling peacefully in her arms. Her son would grow up in love, not in hatred. It was the greatest gift she could offer him. "His name is Tawodi," she said simply, "and you may look at him, but you will not touch him unless you respect his Comanche family." Theron knelt in the red dust, his city clothes contrasting with the simplicity of the camp. He looked at Tawodi with tear-filled eyes that Genevieve had never seen on him. "He has your eyes," he murmured, "and his grandmother's hair." Kahetu approached, placing a protective hand on Genevieve's shoulder. He didn't speak English fluently, but he understood the emotion flowing through this family scene. "Your father?" he asked simply. Genevieve nodded. "Yes, and Tawodi's grandfather." Matahano emerged from the shadows, observing the situation with his usual wisdom. "Man who come back for forgiveness, man who change," he said to Theron. "But forgiveness earned, not taken." Theron looked up at the old man, then at his daughter. "I know I acted wrongly. I was blinded by pride, by fear of what people would say. When your mother died, I forgot how to love." He paused, his hands clenching his hat. "In Durango, they say you were killed by Indians. But I knew the truth. I lived with that guilt every day." Genevieve listened silently. gently rocking Tawoti. In her arms, the child gurgled, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. Then I heard traders speak of a white woman healing among the Comanches. I knew it was you, and I understood. I understood you had found what I never knew how to give you. Sakima approached, curious to understand the English conversation. Genevieve translated for her in a few words, and the young Comanche nodded gravely. Ask him if he accepts Tawoti being raised in our traditions, Sakima said. Genevieve posed the question to her father, who hesitated a long moment before replying. If it's what will make him happy, yes. I just want to be part of his life, to be a grandfather, not a master. The wind blew gently, scattering the ashes of the central fire. In that breeze, Genevieve felt like an approval, a blessing from beyond. She held Tawoti out to Theron, who took him with infinite delicacy. The child looked at him with curiosity, without fear, and his small hands reached out to his grandfather's weathered face. "Hello, little man," Theron whispered, his voice broken by emotion. Has this story of Genevieve and her Comanche family touched your heart? If you have felt the emotion of this transformation, do not hesitate to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Your personal stories of resilience and found family inspire us to create other narratives that celebrate love in all its forms. 2 years later, at the edge of the endless prairie, Genevieve watched Tawoti play with the other children of the camp. His hair had grown into long braids adorned with beads, and his laughter echoed in the warm spring air. Kahitu sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked. She touched her mother's crucifix one last time, then slipped it into a small leather pouch that she hung around Tawoti's neck. Past and present, reconciled in that simple gesture. "Yes," she said, looking at the horizon where the sun was setting. "I am home."